we're set.
Hey, Commissioner. Did I hear you say we're all set, Barb?
Yes.
All right, then we will call to order the City of Ferndale Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, December 13, 2017. It is 6:39 p.m. and we will begin with the roll call when the clerk is ready.
Commissioner Gehrig.
Here.
Azar.
Here.
Martin. Brazen.
Here.
Williamson.
Here.
Farr.
Here.
Baker.
Here.
Cassio.
Here.
Kelly.
Here. And we heard from Councilman Martin that he was out sick this evening. Is there a motion to excuse his absence?
I'll move in that matter.
Second. Thank you. That was a motion from Commissioner Farr with a second from Commissioner Kelly. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. We will now move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to this evening's agenda? Staff or commission? Great. Then I will look for a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as noted.
Second.
Thank you. That's a motion from Commissioner Brazen with a second from Commissioner Farr. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. That motion passes as well. We will move on now to, we have a number of sets of minutes to approve. We'll go through them individually just in case there are any edits. We'll start with the minutes from the meeting of September 20, 2017. Were there any edits or questions about those minutes as they were presented? If not, we will look for a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of September 20, 2017.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. That's a motion by Commissioner Kelly and a second by Commissioner Brazen. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions?
I'll abstain.
Thank you. Abstentions from Commissioner Gehrig and Farr. Sorry, excuse me. So the motion passes. It's had cold season, isn't it? We will move on to the minutes of October 18, 2017. Are there any corrections or questions on those minutes as presented? If not, we'll look for a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes from October 18th, 2017.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. That was a motion from Commissioner Farr, a second from Commissioner Brazen. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I will abstain from that one.
Thank you. Any opposed? We had one abstention from Commissioner Kelly. That motion passes. We'll move to a motion regarding the minutes. Sorry. Our meeting from November 15, 2017. Are there any questions or corrections to those minutes?
One correction. I was actually 5 minutes late. I was not absent, and it reflects me as being absent. I think that's because roll call was taken and I wasn't in the room yet for roll call.
Thank you very much. Are you able to note that, City Clerk, that Williamson was present? Thank you very much. Is there a motion to accept those minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second. Was that Kristen?
Yes.
Okay, we had a motion from Commissioner Kelly with a second from Commissioner Azar. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Thank you. We had abstentions from Commissioner Gehrig and Commissioner Farr. That motion carries. All right. Moving right along, we'll move to our call to audience. This is a chance for anyone in the audience to address the Planning Commission on anything that's not on the agenda tonight. If you want to tell me what Christmas presents you want, whatever you want. When we get to our public hearings and our new business, anything that's on the agenda, there will be time for public comment and questions there. But is there anyone who wants to address the Commission on anything not on the agenda tonight? All right. We will move right along to our first public hearing. Item number 5A is a public hearing on the R2 zoning district text amendment. This is a change that has been discussed for a while. There was an inconsistency that was identified as part of the master planning process, and I will have our city planner introduce this, and then we will open the public hearing.
Great. First of all, thanks everyone for coming. I feel like having only one planning commissioner absent is pretty impressive considering what's going on outside. So thank you very much. So we kind of discussed this a bit at the last meeting. bringing the R2 zoning district and schedule of regulations into a place that does allow for the housing diversity and the density that we discussed as part of the master plan. So essentially, we're proposing to amend the minimum lot width from 50 feet to 35 feet. We recently updated the R3 zoning district lot width to be 33 feet. So this is 2 feet different than R3, which we can discuss if you like. I just seemed there should be some difference just because of the different intensities of the zoning district. Also updated the minimum lot area from 6,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet, which is in alignment with the other districts as well. Essentially, that 35 feet wide lot would allow for that density and differentiation between the districts, as I mentioned. Specifically, it was in the land use portion of the master plan, pages 49 to 50, and providing an opportunity for density, walkable urban residential neighborhoods. We also, as part of the BZA, not a ton of requests, I would say. There's certainly been, at least since I've been here, probably 10 to 15 requests of lot splits that were not able to be granted in these districts just because of the current minimum. The BZA has seen probably 3 or 4, I think, requests over recent years for that request, and those requests ranged from 33 feet to 40 feet. So as of right now, we're recommending 35 feet, and the minimum lot area change. And staff did just do a quick analysis of the R2 district. The number of lots that are less than 35 feet is really only, I think, about 5% of the total number of lots. So it seemed that those lots that don't conform to the new 35 feet, those would have to be part of lot combinations or something like that to move forward. Otherwise, they'd be non-conforming. But
sorry, before I open for public comment, did you receive any calls or questions or correspondence?
I did not.
After the public notice? We will then open the public hearing in the matter of the R2 zoning district text amendment. We'll open that public hearing at 6:46 p.m. Public hearings are a chance for the public to share questions, comments, or concerns about this particular agenda item with the Planning Commission. For these two public hearings, city staff will do the introduction, then I'll open the public hearing. If there's anyone to speak on this item, please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. We limit comments to 3 minutes during public hearings. Please speak into the microphone and address your comments to the Planning Commission. We'll take all comments, and then we'll close the public hearing, and we'll work to answer and address all those comments and questions. We will open the public hearing. Unless did I already do that? Sorry, 6:47 p.m. Anyone here to speak to this item tonight? We'll close the public hearing at 6:47 p.m. Any questions from the commission for our city staff?
I have one question, and that is, you mentioned that 5% of the homes would be non-conforming. What would the minimum width need to be to include most of those properties?
Even at 30, you'd still be probably losing 4%.
Okay.
I mean, 4% would be non-conforming. So
Okay.
I want to say that at less than 35 feet, I think, was about 150 lots. So there are some fragments that are included in there as well.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the commission?
I think it was discussed. I'll
Yeah.
move the Planning
Talked about
Commission
this several
recommend
times.
approval of the amendment to Article 3, Section 24 through 43 to City Council as summarized below in the packet for the December 13th meeting. Support.
Thank you. That was a motion by Commissioner Farr. Was that a second by Commissioner Gurink or Williamson? Williamson. Fantastic. We'll do a roll call vote on this one.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
Do we need
Please.
to specify that it's the R2 district in the findings or in the motion? Because it's just discussing changing the lot width and minimum lot area.
We can. Yeah.
make it-
Well, is Article 3, Sections 24 through 43?
I think that's just generally for the residential districts, and it never specifies R2.
I'd accept that friendly amendment.
Was the seconder acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you. City Clerk, was that amendment clear? Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, then we'll have a roll call vote when the clerk is ready.
Okay. Commissioners Azar,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Gehrig,
Yes.
and Williamson,
Yes.
Kelly. Did I already?
You got Kelly.
Far. I'm sorry.
It's all right, yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Now we will move on to our second public hearing of the evening. This is on a similar issue, something that the commission is familiar with, something that was brought to our attention through Commissioner Williamson, as well as was discussed a little bit informally at our training session with the Board of Zoning Appeals this weekend, and that is a text amendment to accessory buildings, structures, and uses. So before we open that public hearing, we'll have an introduction from our city staff.
Thank you. As Chair Baker mentioned, we did have some discussion about this, reducing the side yard setback for accessory buildings and structures from 5 feet to 3 feet if fire-rated construction is present. There were not, I would say, specific calls about this public hearing, but it's a weekly discussion in the building department on where garages can be sited, and this is probably one of the most popular requests. I wouldn't say a ton of requests have came to the BZA, but enough that it warranted further discussion. So there's obviously a lot of non-conforming accessory buildings and narrow lot widths in the city. So having some of those accessory structures requested to be rebuilt, they are often denied because of this ordinance. The city's building official knew from Birmingham. It was something he brought up early on in his tenure, saying that this might alleviate a lot of this questions, and if you're trying to allow people to continue to stay in Ferndale and make existing improvements to their homes, this is probably one that's easy that the residential code already allows for. So something that a few builders already this week had said, if this moves forward, we're pretty excited that it will help in some of the projects they're doing. But I made the requested changes referencing the Michigan residential code rather than the building code, and it's written in a way that whatever the adopted code is would be governing for this ordinance.
Thank you. Before I open the public hearing, is there anything that you would want to add, Commissioner Williamson?
No, I think this is a good move, and it's going to make a lot of our residents and developers happy.
And comply with building code. So we will open the public hearing on item number 5B. That is the text amendment to the accessory building structures and uses, section 24-183 of our zoning ordinance. We'll open that public hearing at 6:52 p.m. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? All right, we will close the public hearing at 6:52 p.m. Any questions or comments from the commission on this item?
I do have a question on the side yard. I was just looking for the definition for side yard, and it's side yard versus side setback. Just wondering if there's any clarification on that, as defined. Does that go from the whole length of the parcel, the depth of the parcel, I should say, or is this? I just don't want to get in a weird, tricky situation where we're actually referring to something a little bit more inclusive than specified.
Sure. Yeah. I shared it with the city attorney, and he was comfortable with that language. I need to pull up the definition again just to see, but I don't think that will be an issue. He was comfortable with it and the language of it as it stands now.
So looking for that definition, though, am I looking at 903? What am I looking for? Where's my definitions?
Because I know in some locations are referring to a side yard was actually just that portion between the front and the back, and that portion between the buildings. just wanted to make sure we're actually referring to the yard that reaches all the way back to the back property line, the rear. I mean, I guess if you had that
I was just going to
from the
say,
city attorney, I think
I'm trying to find my.
I'm okay with that if that's what is
Where's the
intended.
definitions? Would it
Yeah, I
be
mean,
here?
the setback definition is just minimum required horizontal distance between the building or structure and the front, side, and rear lot lines.
Okay.
Is side yard defined, I think is what we're.
Yeah, the side yard.
Yeah, there's a graphic in the
Right.
definitions, and it kind of outlines the buildable area.
Right.
So,
What section are you in?
19.11.
Somebody's not struggling to find that.
24-461 is where the graphic is.
You did that up.
19-11, Krista?
Yeah.
Sorry, I usually have my paper book and it's much easier.
You want to pass this?
Sure. Oh, that'd be great. Mine's in the car and I'm not going back out there.
No, it's okay.
What was that? Where was it
Here, let's
located
send
again,
this down.
Jesse?
24-461.
461, okay.
Okay. Sorry to hold it back. I just wanted to make sure.
Nope. Please take a look.
Oh, no, it's good.
Oh, yep, it's in the graphic. Good catch, though.
Is that clarified?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. Better to take the time now than to have the city building officials interpreting it
Send it
in
back,
different
yeah.
ways. Yep. Great.
Yes, we don't want to make it worse
No.
for ourselves.
This is the rear yard.
Any other questions for the city staff or discussion among the planning commission on this item? Again, I think this is one we're pretty familiar with.
Yep.
Talked about it a couple times. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve the text amendment.
I'll move the planning commission recommend approval of the amendment to Article 4, Section 24-180-183, 1E and F to City Council as summarized below with the following findings as stated in the packet for December 13th Planning Commission.
Second.
Thank you. That's a motion from Commissioner Farr with a second from Commissioner Brazen. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, then we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Kelly,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Williamson,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Garrick,
Yes.
Baker.
Yes, motion passes. Thank you very much. Now, moving to the new business as opposed to things that we've seen like 18 times. So, one before you guys. So we will start with 6A, the site plan for 2441 Goodrich Street. This is the distillery project, I believe?
Yes.
Yes. We'll have an introduction from our city staff, and then if there's anyone from the applicant here, we'd welcome them to share information as well.
Great. I'll give a brief introduction, but really the next three items are the 5/8 architecture show, I would say. So 5/8 is requesting site plan approval on behalf of Weiss Distilling. So the site is an existing industrial building in the M1 zone. Currently, there's a small office associated with the producer in that facility. We've been talking about this area quite a bit as part of the master plan process in the future of the M1 district. As of right now, this is aligning with the current ordinance. We did talk a few months ago about adjusting the production production definition for this district, which I can get into a little bit later. But as of right now, this falls under the existing ordinance. So the proposed use is as a distillery with an associated tasting room, which is considered their retail. We've talked quite a bit throughout the process, the site plan review process, and it's went through engineering, police, and fire as well. So the current property is just one parcel, corner of Goodrich and East Drayton Street. From an access and circulation perspective, that's kind of been the key discussion point with the applicants. So they have a verbal agreement at this point with an adjacent property owner who has access parking to the north. They would be required, and Commissioner Kelly pointed this out earlier, the condition E I would add to the staff report that the final shared parking agreement be registered or submitted and signed, recorded with the Oakland County Register of Deeds. So that would be the additional condition. But in total, the off-street parking requirements would require 10 spaces. Verbally, at least they have secured that and did share an email with me that shows that their lawyer is working on the final draft of that agreement. So should the Planning Commission move forward, they would be required to submit that to the city. Otherwise, any site plan approval that you would give tonight would be null and void. Part of that improvement to the parking area would be handicap parking and a pathway from that accessory parking lot. Applicants also are providing a bicycle rack on site. The majority of the building will remain intact with existing masonry and some metal paneling that's there, but the addition would actually be constructed of 2 shipping containers, which as far as architectural compatibility seems to be in alignment with a lot of the metal and work and such in the district. Applicants provided the landscaping requirements that were necessary, which would provide some greenery in that district, which there's actually not much of at this point, which would be an improvement. There's also a screen dumpster that would be at the southwest corner of the site as well. I'm happy to go into more detail. There's a few conditions, as I mentioned, 4 currently on the staff report that you have, and then I would add the 5th one as well regarding the parking agreement. But I'm happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Thank you. Does the applicant want to share anything in addition? Welcome.
Okay. Dennis Weiss couldn't be here tonight. He's out of town in Wisconsin. So I'm Grant Jeffries with 5/8 Architecture. I'm representing him. The parking agreement, Dennis actually thought this meeting was tomorrow, so he had scheduled the meeting between his attorney and the owner of 1200 Woodward Heights today, and then they ended up canceling that meeting due to the weather. So we were planning on having that agreement in writing by today, but it's in the works. We do have an email from the owner of 1200 Woodward Heights saying verbally, yes, I'm agreeing to rent those spots from you. So, and then the tasting room is actually it's actually 3 shipping containers. The actual bar itself is 2 side by side that will be mostly opened at the seam between the 2, so it creates enough space for about a 15 to 20 person bar tasting room. And then there'll be a 3rd shipping container on top of those 2 that will just be used for storage. Won't be accessible by patrons of the tasting room. That's all I have. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, thank you. I've got questions about a lot about parking. Some of them are probably for you, and a couple of them are probably for Justin. Is there any parking on site either for patrons or staff?
Excuse me. Right now, the parking for the building is where we're intending to put the addition.
Right.
And then there is a vacant lot to the south of the building. And Dennis is actually in the process of purchasing this building from his current landlord. And that lot is getting split down the middle. And due to that, we didn't have the width to do the parking on the south side on the actual lot, which we would have preferred. So that's why we decided to pursue the option of using the adjacent lot to the north.
Where's your staff parking?
Well, the staff would also park in those shared spaces.
But you're only securing 10 of them?
Correct, but the 10 the calculations that we did to arrive at that 10 was based on the ordinance. And
Understood. Yeah. Just, yeah. How many people will you typically have on site as operations are underway?
I believe there will be usually 1 to 2 people in the actual distillery and then 1 or 2 bartenders. So 2 to 4 staff members at any given time. But usually the bottling process, when there might be the need for the 2 staff members, would probably occur during the day before the tasting room is open. I believe he's only planning on opening the tasting room after 5 on like Wednesdays through Sundays or something like that.
Got it. Just knowing how popular Valentine is and what their parking challenges have been, we just got to poke the parking a little bit. Justin, is there on-street parking currently allowed on Drayton?
There's not.
We're going to have overflow parking, I can tell you that.
Right. Yeah, there's not on Drayton. There is on Goodrich.
There is
About
on
a-
Goodrich? Okay.
Yes, about a block away, there is some like 15-minute or less parking on Drayton, on the south side of Drayton, which I would be curious if it's actually enforced or not. That's something I can follow up on. But
Right.
but Goodrich is where there's folks parking at this point.
And there is a dearth of sidewalks in this neighborhood, all right? So I know that there was a lot of attention in the site plan given to how people would circulate from the leased space across the street to the tasting room, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about pedestrian safety in the neighborhood in general. So if we've got people parking on Goodrich, there's no sidewalks, as overflow parking happens, how can the city accommodate some of these changes in uses?
Yeah, it's something that we're looking at. Woodward Heights is going to be, which is north, obviously, of this site. But Woodward Heights is being looked at for 2019 resurfacing and adding sidewalks there.
Okay.
So if we can extend that into the district more, I think at least it makes sense for a block to 2 blocks in to extend that if we can. There are some challenges with property ownership there and in green belts and stuff like that. But I mean, what's kind of cool about this district is that since the master plan and having a joint meeting there, there's been a lot more conversations happening between businesses. And they've been actually talking about coming to the city with that type of request and how they might be able to contribute. So that is something, further that we need to discuss, but they're interested in making it more of a walkable, bikeable area as well. So
The DPW?
the other businesses in
Other
the
businesses.
districts, yes.
Okay. This might be for the applicant, and you may or may not know this if you just had the meeting then with the building owner on Woodward Heights. Do you know how long your shared parking agreement would be in effect?
I don't.
Okay. And then thinking about, there's a number of businesses located in the big building.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, at this point, mostly daytime uses or warehouse uses. If your distillery is hugely successful and the big red building goes, oh, I want a micro distillery in my place, I could quickly see parking needs at that building, meaning that they don't have overflow space for you guys anymore, which is, and hence my question about the timeline and what's the, how can you hold them to it,
Right.
for 3 years, 5 years, something, just so that you know that you're making an investment and it's that your parking isn't going to get gobbled up by the property owner, maybe seeing your success and wanting to do something different at the big red building. I don't know what else to call it other than the big red building. We know what it is. It's the big red building. I have one other question, but I can hold it. Are there other questions from the commission, please?
Through the chair, I do have a question about accessibility in shipping containers. I see that I'm happy to see you have an accessible parking space, but I'm just wondering, just because I don't know, how accessible shipping containers are when they're used for building.
I think they had some ramping.
Yeah, we do. So the floor of the floor of the shipping container will be approximately 6 or 7 inches above the sidewalk or concrete pad that it's set in place on. So we're showing a ramp that leads to that front entry door that would, follow the 1 to 12 maximum slope for an ADA ramp and have the appropriate size landing at the door that leads into the building.
Great, thank you.
And if I saw correctly, that path is what you've shown as being, there's some sidewalk constructed on your neighbor's property and then some striping across the street that creates that path from the barrier-free space into the building. I saw that on the site plan. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, we would, Dennis, my client, would be the one that would, pay for the upgrades to add an ADA ramp to get up from the van accessible spot up onto a sidewalk and then back down onto the street to cross the street and get to the tasting room.
Is that in the city easement, Justin, or is that on the Big Red Building's property? That sidewalk?
It's in the city,
So,
require a right-of-way permit.
okay.
But I think the way that it's set up, if we were to add a sidewalk there, aligns with what future plan would be there.
So the city's open, I mean, I can't really approve something that's not on the property that's controlled by the applicant. The city's open to allowing that.
Yeah, DPW and engineering looked at it in front of the
Please,
Since
Commissioner
we're kind of talking about that pathway already, Justin, I was wondering what the take is with that mid-block crossing. I know it's just about 100 feet from the corner, so it's kind of the choice of having that mid-block crossing there. I think it's being realistic about where people are going to go from parking straight over to the entrance, but just as far as safety and the city's concerns.
Yeah, I mean, it's, police, that's kind of one of the things that they look at. They were pretty comfortable with it. I definitely see the point, but I think we're going to sign off on it.
So there'll be striping in the street in the right of way? Okay.
And signage that goes with it.
Gotcha.
Through the chair, on that point, it appears that there are currently sort of pedestrian landing zones on the two north corners. And if we are to, as part of this project, construct sidewalk, I'm wondering if at least, even if we aren't going to stripe a crosswalk there, if we can include those landing zones in the, I mean, it's just not called out on here, but when it gets to full design.
Thank you. Other questions on parking and circulation or anything else you want to jump in on?
Through the chair. This is a distillery and bottling business, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the layout, and I don't see any of the internal or the distilling and everything, but what I was looking at is access, and I couldn't identify where you were going to, things would come in and out and circulate in that fashion regarding deliveries, and I don't know if I just couldn't find it, but...
So directly to the west of the shipping containers, there's an existing overhead door on the building, and that would be, so
Where the gravel is? Is that gravel or cement?
The new concrete slab.
New concrete, thank you.
yeah, correct. We'll be pouring new concrete there.
Got it.
When they receive grain and other materials for the distilling process, a truck would pull into that space and they would be able to load and unload through that overhead door.
The door's just not full.
It's not on this plan. It looks like, is that railing that you have for entry, is that like in front of the door, so to speak?
Yeah, it does sort of impede into the width of the door, but we're hoping that we left enough space between the building and the landing, and also that the width of the concrete pad will go all the way to the west end of the building. So they might have to sort of use a hand truck to make up that diagonal distance, but They won't be. They wouldn't, even if that path was completely clear. I don't think they'd be backing up trucks into the building itself.
To the chair, if I could. Is the bottling and distilling operation? I mean, it is completely taking up the entirety of the existing building.
No, so the existing building, as you can see, is sort of an L shape, and that front portion is sort of office and manufacturing space for Detroit Grooming Company. So it's the existing footprint of the building's just over 3,000 square feet, and it's roughly split half and half between that other tenant and then the space for the distillery, which is roughly 1,600 square feet. So as Dennis is purchasing the building, he would be taking over the lease for Detroit Grooming Company, and they'd continue to lease the space from him on that front portion.
Through the chair, do you know where Detroit Grooming parks right now?
I think they park in that vacant lot to the south, which is currently being split due to the sale of the lot. But I included the square footage of that tenant space in the parking calculations because I knew that they would no longer be able to park in that lot.
Through the chair.
Yep, please.
Do you have a front door on the street?
So the grooming company office has a door on Goodrich, and the front door, so to speak, for the tasting room will be off of Drayton.
It looks like it's sort of oriented toward the side, though, not toward Drayton.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't face Drayton directly, but you'd enter from that path that we're creating across Drayton.
So that'll be your main business door entry, and then your other entry is the overhead door. So those are the two means of access into your building.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any issue with it not fronting its address in this district?
No.
I don't think so.
Through the chair. Is the only access to the upper container, which is storage only, that ladder?
Yeah, tell me about the ladder.
So the plan for that upper container, they'll have a small forklift as part of their operations, and the plan is when they have a barrel that they want to age for 2 years or so for certain liquors, they would load the barrel on a forklift, take it out that overhead door, lift it up on top of the container that's on top is only 20 feet long, whereas the lower ones are 40 feet, so there'll be space where they can set that barrel down on top of the lower container, and then somebody can climb up there and there'll be a hand cart up in that upper storage container. They'd open the door, grab the hand cart, bring the barrel inside, and leave it there for 2 years while it ages. So they won't be accessing that upper container very often.
Commissioner Goering, did you have a question on this one too?
Not about that in particular. I was kind of curious about that too, though. Right by the entrance for anybody who would actually be using the tasting room.
Right, or potentially backing cars into it.
Mhm.
Like that was
Through the chair, do you have any plans to secure that ladder
Yeah.
so that people can't just climb up it?
Yeah, I have mentioned that to my client as something that we should do. We haven't detailed the ladder out yet, but I was envisioning one of those ladders that kind of has a back to it, so if it kind of prevents you from falling off backwards, and then there could be some sort of padlock that prevents, a screen and a padlock that prevents people,
Right.
just any patron from climbing up onto the roof of the shipping containers.
That would be the concern,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
That may be something to include in the motion for
I
final
would
site
think so.
plan. Other questions?
Yeah, through the
Right,
chair.
yep.
I was just kind of looking. I think this is kind of requires that there's is it a minimum or maximum of 20% retail use in this district? I have clarification on that. And then the second part of that is with the calculations of the square footage. I believe it's including the tenant space. That's not actually the portion that's incorporated with the distillery and the business, the tasting and the distillery. So kind of clarification about the 20%.
So right now, the M1 district does, it's a minimum of 20%, not a maximum. We talked about doing a maximum, and which I'm totally okay with. A couple of different avenues to go with that. Do it at the next meeting as a stopgap measure, or it did seem like the whole district needs kind of more of a just overarching view regarding what's the future parking, what's the future city infrastructure plans, and things like that. So kind of once we started doing the form-based code for downtown, that kind of traded focus from this district to that. But I'm happy to go either do the stopgap measure or do, M1 district was kind of our next deep dive into the zoning ordinance and what's there. And anyway, so.
Does this comply with the ordinance as it's currently written, with that minimum in
Yes.
there? And is it related to the full building size or just to the distillery? I think it's got to be,
Well,
if it's just the distillery,
The
it's got to be at
minimum-
least 20.
I just need clarification on the
It
minimum.
should be maximum.
Yeah, okay. It's
Should-
just
There's
the
no
wrong
point in,
word,
there's
right?
no point in stating minimum. I
Right.
think we can talk about that at
Yeah.
administrative items. I want to make
Okay.
sure we
Yeah.
put a bow
Well,
on that.
I
Yeah.
just want to make sure
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, there were like 4 of us who went.
because I think if you're including the tenant space, it's not hitting 20%. But
But if it's just the distillery
if it's
space.
just a distillery, it's up closer to 28, 29%.
Yeah.
So just,
But I do think the intention is that it's maximum, given
Mm-hmm.
the desire to retain the
right.
sort of central manufacturing character of the neighborhood.
In which case, this is,
Right, but as
Coming out
it's
about
stated
right
in the
there.
ordinance right now, it says minimum. So I think need to comply with what the ordinance says right now. But I want to make sure we don't lose that one tonight, so we can fix it if that's the will of the commission.
So if I include the tenant space, it's about 17% retail. Once you add the additional square footage provided by the addition.
And without it, what is it? Sorry. Through the chair.
I think it was, excuse me, a bit over 20.
Okay.
closer to,
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Goring, did you have another?
I think that's a kind of a confusing thing as part of this, because are we trying to get over, under? Are we considering it just for the distillery? Are we looking at the whole building? So that remains a point of confusion, I guess, for me.
Yeah. Let's make sure to do that tonight.
I mean, it feels like it's trying to get towards as close to 20% as possible, but I'm not. I can't really speak to what this.
Did anyone have any thoughts on the shipping containers? Because actually, a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood are block or brick, as opposed to corrugated metal. This one is like a little bit of an outlier.
Through the chair, I think
I
my
think
thoughts
it's
are
interesting in the
small
district,
enough
but-
area, and it's
Mhm.
immediately adjacent. I mean, so it's kind of tucked in. So to me, it's more like an accent or a feature than it is like a complete standalone structure.
I think it's interesting in the district, and this would be the place to do it. But I don't know that I would argue that it complements its neighbors. And I think it does. I think it complements maybe the district, but. Any other questions? My biggest concern is about parking, and just making sure that the city is comfortable with that lease. Justin, do we have any examples recently of shared parking, maybe from Ferndale House, and what the term of that lease was that we were comfortable with? It was a few years at Ferndale House. I remember we talked about that.
Yes. I mean, I think most of them have been
Just to give you guidance if you're going to approve something
right.
after the fact.
Right. I mean, I think most of them have been sort of open-ended, which the ordinance doesn't really clarify either way. Which I'd probably suggest, making a minimum in that in the future. But I think all of them, you know, Otis Supply is probably a good example of one where now there is going to be,
Right.
you know, a development project there that, you know, at some point that parking will disappear. It's a little different in that project in that they are providing new on-street spaces, but that also has to service that new building. So, you know, I don't know what we're allowed to do
Yeah.
from that perspective, but
Is there anything that the commission is more or less comfortable with in terms of a term or renewal options? Or I just looking at the uses that we've got popping up in this district, which are really interesting, and how big the red building is. Even if it's a maximum of 20% of the big red building, that's going to eat up a ton of parking spaces and could potentially impact their ability to continue to lease.
Through the chair, I mean, I would be interested to see with all of the shared parking agreements we've seen thus far, even outside of this district, if there's an average number of years in the term. Without that, I don't really have an opinion. I mean, off the top of my head, I feel like 5. But that's random.
Yeah.
So,
I just feel like you want to protect your investment as the property owner.
right.
You know,
But I also...
know you've got parking.
I also feel as though because we are seeing so much change in this area, to go beyond something like 5 years would be a little bit challenging. And I think we're going to continue to see this area be in flux and have to sort of reimagine what parking looks like anyway.
I imagine it is going to be challenging to try to do any volume of on-street parking in this
Right.
neighborhood too, just given how smaller our
right,
easements are.
right.
Any other thoughts on anything?
Parking. Yeah, through the chair, I have a question. And Justin, I guess this is for you. There's signage shown in the elevation with dimensions and so on, but I know we're not reviewing that here. So would that be a condition? The way it's written, you know, there's findings and conditions, but it doesn't mention signage as
Signage.
conditions. So would that be appropriate to put that there? Is it-
We talked a little bit about signage beforehand and just knowing that 40 is the maximum and you have to submit a separate permit. So
Okay.
I don't think it's required, but you certainly could.
Just wondering,
include
since
it,
it's detailed on the drawing, that
Sure.
what we're
Yeah.
approving is
right.
going to be reviewed,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if it's more comfortable, you can say signage will be separate permit, not approved as this package or
I
something.
just wonder
Yeah.
where it belonged or if we needed to address it, but
Yeah.
if we don't, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through the chair, is there what I was trying to get at earlier? I think with the size of the building, is the distillery going to use the whole space? I mean, was there really no option but to add on to this to get this tasting room? I mean, you're losing. I fear these parking agreements personally. I don't know. Once we pass them through based on it, it feels like a contract to me that someone could just, you know, stop abiding by, and there may be some punishment outside what we can even deal with. So, is this an operation that could incorporate the tasting room into the existing building without, you're just basically getting rid of the only parking that is there? Is there a way that you guys could have incorporated through heights, or was this? I just wonder what the floor space in there looks like, because I didn't see that.
Yeah, I think the only way that could have happened is if that front tenant moves out and that front area kind of becomes the tasting room, because that 1,600 square feet they've kind of, you know, allotted all of that, and we're also taking up a small portion of that to install some new ADA bathrooms. But also those parking spots on the Drayton side that we're taking up the footprint of are, I believe, Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, non-conforming, because you have to back up into Drayton Street in order to get out of them. So even if we weren't doing the addition, I think we wouldn't technically be using that area as parking.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff?
Yeah, through the chair. Guess more towards staff, but I'm looking at where the trees are positioned in discussion about sidewalks in the district. Looks like they'd be going more or less in the exact same spot based on where they're put in here. So I was wondering if there's enough space for sidewalk and a tree there, and how would that be handled?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that, and potentially the city would maybe just have a sidewalk on the north side of Drayton rather than both sides, just because of it just depends what the district priorities are, really. You could, but where the trees are, you're absolutely right. Where the trees are located now, I don't think you could have both. So we would probably focus on having it on the north side, because on the north or southeast corner there already is kind of like a corner that's built out with sidewalk. So we'd probably just continue that. But
I don't want to be spending money and doing work for no reason. That's going to
Yeah.
be torn up later.
Yeah.
So.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Good question. Any other questions or a motion?
Just a comment. I just want to, when we spoke about Farm Field Tables Place putting in some sort of food thing, that was the other time that we were discussing this area. And what we were concerned about then in the site plan is the safety of the people. I think you're putting in a pretty cool product here that's going to draw more than I worry about the amount of parking, even with the amount of spaces given looking at Valentine's. So any way that we can improve the safety for people coming and leaving from this place when there's not sidewalks is something that I would just want to see, or maybe even put more into the plan, or just considering that, because you got to think you're going to have people parking down Drayton and down Goodrich, and then walking up and around Goodrich to get there, and then they're going to be walking in the streets, and that's where my concern comes in, is the safety of your patrons. So.
Any other questions or comments or a motion? And just as a reminder for the motion maker, we've talked about needing to secure the ladder. We've talked about the parking lease needing to be approved and registered, and we've talked about compliance with the sign ordinance.
I'll make a motion. I move in the matter of 2441 Goodrich Street that the Planning Commission approve the site plan based on the plans dated received by the Planning Department on December 13th, 2017, with the findings and subject to the conditions listed in the packet, with the addition of Condition E, that the city obtain the shared parking agreement and that it be registered with Oakland County. Condition F, that security measures be added to the ladder to the upper shipping container. And I guess, do we need to add Condition G, that we comply with the sign ordinance, or is that inherent? Sure. Condition G, that the site plan comply with the city sign ordinance.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, that was a motion by Commissioner Kelly with a second by Commissioner Brazen. Is there any discussion on that motion?
I have a question regarding it. I had G, which would now be H, but something, either signage or working with the city regarding the flow of pedestrians from Goodrich as something that's considered once it moved from here. It's not in the site plan, but as you stated, it would be making the city do something based on the easements, but at least a consideration, maybe a direction, maybe it's a sidewalk in the front, depending on where those lot lines. I obviously can't say, put something in there forcing the city to do something. But
Yeah, is that a direction to the city or to the applicant?
I'd say the applicant to work with the city in both and present some ideas. I don't know how that could be phrased as another condition, but
Well, I'm not sure either, actually.
Well, I just took a look at the street view, and I think a sidewalk makes sense because the door that serves the other leased space has a pad that leads to a hard surface. So if they're building there and putting grass, now they're cutting off accessibility into that current business, the current door on the rest of that building. So it may affect how that part of the building is used. So there might need to be a sidewalk as part of the discussion of providing egress or, a solid surface outside of their door or access into it.
And the other thing we could consider potentially too is if it just seemed like trees, if sidewalk is more important than trees here, we could have the applicants pay into the city tree fund, and then we can distribute those somewhere else in the district where it makes sense. We've done that for other projects, but
But I can't compel an applicant to install.
no. But if we wanted to preserve that area for future sidewalk that the city would put in.
Well, wait now. Bringing it more into code compliance. I'm thinking about 8 Mile next to Hayes Lummers. Our axle guys put in the sidewalk.
Right. I thought we could, so.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm questioning myself. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I would add, I guess to clarify my condition, then H, that a sidewalk be placed around the building to facilitate the flow of the patrons from the front door and the side doors of this building.
Goodrich and Drayton sides, you're suggesting?
Yes. Circling the building, basically, on the north and the east side.
I would accept that friendly amendment.
Second. Accept.
Discussion on the motion. Are we comfortable that would disrupt the landscaping
Yeah,
plan?
but then we'd have to adjust the landscaping, which I think makes sense anyway, based on the power lines and the utilities that are already there.
Yeah.
And the river birch multi-stem trees can get quite large in a small area like that with power lines. So all in all, I think that makes sense. I don't know what we need to do on the landscaping, but you said to the city tree fund is the other option.
Mm-hmm. Any other discussion on the motion?
If I could, through the chair, just because it seems like several of us are concerned about the shared parking agreement. Does it make sense to try and add a condition putting a time limit on that shared parking agreement?
Time minimum?
A time minimum, yeah, precisely.
It would be hard for me to do sitting here not looking at the other things that we'd approved. I
Right.
wouldn't want it to be way out of compliance with other things we'd approved.
I agree with that. I'm wondering if we should take some time to
Research
review
that.
that.
What about a condition that the shared parking, the time frame for the shared parking agreement not be less than any shared parking agreements that we have approved within the last 3 years? My recollection is that the Ferndale House shared parking agreement is for 5 years, possibly with options
I think it is.
to renew. But I can't go back far enough in the packets to actually pull up the Ferndale House packet, so I wasn't able to double check that.
Ferndale House is the last one I remember us seeing. Some of Axel's happened after the fact, if I remember correctly, so I don't know if we ever saw those agreements. But I think Ferndale House is the last one I remember us actually seeing, and I also remember 5 years. But.
I think we would be safe to do that, as Commissioner Williamson is suggesting. And then I would agree that we need to come to a comfortable, consensus about what our minimum would be following that. But in the interest of not holding up
Sure.
the applicant in this case.
Justin, are you comfortable with that direction, or do you want anything clarified?
So what was the actual final condition? To not be less than the shared parking agreements we've reviewed in the last 3 years?
That's what I heard.
Yeah,
Okay.
that the term of the agreement not be a shorter time period than anything that has been approved in the last 3 years.
Okay.
To be no less than the minimum.
Yeah.
Correct. And I think we could add that to condition E, in the interest of condensing.
Support.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion?
Can we just clarify where we're at with the conditions? I have E, final parking agreement signed and filed with Oakland County with the minimum not less than the recently approved parking agreements. F, adequate protection security for the ladder and the upper storage. H was
G,
or G.
sign compliance, sign
Sign
ordinance.
G was sign compliance. H was sidewalk around the building, and I guess would be to change the agricultural or the architectural plans regarding the trees and paying to the tree fund instead. That sound about right?
That about covers our discussion, I think.
I think so.
Is the applicant okay with that?
Yeah.
Maybe we can ask that.
It's not a conditional thing.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
My amendment.
Is, City Clerk, are you clear with the? I got it. Okay, great, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, then we will have a roll call vote.
Okay. Let's see. Casio.
Yes.
Baker.
Yes.
Farr.
Yes.
Williamson.
Yes.
Brazen.
Yes.
Kelly.
Yes.
Azar.
Yes.
Gurink.
Yes.
Thank you, that motion passes. We'll move to our next fun thing in the neighborhood at 780 Woodward Heights. This is a site plan for Drifter Coffee. This is, 'cause I clarified with Justin earlier, this is for only the smaller building facing Woodward Heights, which if you look closely at it, actually sort of isn't attached to the big warehouse. There would be a different proposal coming to us related to the big warehouse.
Right, correct.
Thank you. All right.
Great.
Start us off.
Great.
780.
As Chair Baker said, we're in the same neighborhood. Just a point of clarification, the address, it's listed in here as 780 and 800. I believe 780 is what we landed on. Is that correct, guys?
We submitted it originally as 780. There's currently some numbers on the building 780.
Okay.
But I believe Kathy, I'm not sure we submitted, could not find that address
Yeah.
in the system.
Oh.
Because the lot is one big
Right.
lot.
One huge parcel, right?
So
Yeah.
we changed it to 800, but I think they have plans to sort of apply, I don't know what that process is, but apply for some new
Yeah.
addresses.
Right. So it would be a new address, 780 in our system, just for record keeping sake. So 780 is what the motion should say at this point.
And as it's described, it's clearly the smaller building.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep. Great.
Correct. So
'Cause that'd be a lot of coffee, guys.
a lot of cold brew in there.
A lot of coffee.
So
That might smell better than Midwest Wire products. Don't
yeah, probably.
they? Sorry.
So, as Chair Baker said, in the same neighborhood, M1 zoning once again. The building is currently small, vacant office type building, and we've been talking about this area obviously since the master plan. So the intended use of the property is a coffee roasting production facility, associated retail. Obviously, there's seating and a coffee bar in there for consumption on site. It falls under that same conversation of production facilities with the minimum of 20% retail. Plan was reviewed by collective departments, and so as you saw in the packet, it was a revised site plan with some updates. So regarding parking, there's a existing surface parking lot, and I think the number of spaces ended up changing a little bit in the end, just based on some circulation, but the required amount is on the site plan. meets requirements for bicycle parking, maneuvering lanes, all of those sorts of things. It's important to note there is an existing circular drive at the front of the building. Staff's first inclination with that was that looks like a drive-through, but it's an existing kind of loading area from the previous use, so that would
Or
not.
it's a semi-turnaround.
Right, semi-turnaround.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that would not be permitted as a drive-through, obviously, as those are not permitted in the district. From a building design perspective, largely would be upgrades to the existing interior layout, obviously, and the exterior facade. There would be an addition on the rear of the building, about 500 square feet, sort of a greenhouse-style area where majority of the production would be, as the applicant does do some roasting and then some shipping and receiving for her product. Some new windows would be added to open up the building a bit, and then some final materials will be discussed with the final site plan. Landscaping was discussed as well. The current plan meets that requirement. Also discussed signage similar to the last application that would have to be submitted through a separate application as well. So no additional conditions, at least at this point, on this staff report. More details on lighting, and then the usual caveats of engineering plans with the building submittal, and there's a conversation going on about fire suppression, and if that is required, that'd be part of the building plans as well. So from a city perspective, we are in the process of applying for a supplemental grant to go with our federally funded resurfacing of Woodward Heights in 2019. We're including a sidewalk on Woodward Heights as part of that project, which the residents have been asking for that for a few years now, so that'll be nice to deliver on that.
When does that come? 2019?
2019, yes.
Okay.
Other than that, here to answer any questions you have of staff.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that the applicant would like to share by way of introduction? Welcome. Are you the person who's in that cute little food truck?
Yes.
At Wayne State. Nice to meet you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for having
I'm not a
me.
coffee drinker, but I know your little truck. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. My name's Aaliyah, and I'm the owner of Drifter Coffee, a local traveling coffee truck and a vintage trailer. We've been traveling all over Michigan for the past 3 years, and I live in Ferndale, and I'm really looking forward to planting my roots a little bit more into the community and having a spot to expand my business and increase production of roasting coffee and also distributing coffee and cold brew in the area, while also creating a community space for people in the neighborhood to come congregate, get a cup of coffee. And so we're working with 5/8 and the Iron Ridge District, which it seems like you guys are really familiar with. So I think together we can really create that space. And so I'll turn it over to Brad if you guys don't have any questions for me.
Thank you. All right, so I will start with, and I don't know if it's a question for you. Talk to me about how your staffing works, and how many staff you might have on site at any given time, and where they would work.
Sure. So at any given time, we could have probably between 2 and 4 staff members. And as of right now, that's not something that I really thought about, but we have the parking adjacent to the building.
Yep.
There's also a lot of parking across the street in the neighborhood, and I believe on the whole, with the large building next door, there will be tons of additional parking since that's going to be an event space. So I think we're sort of looking at the bigger picture as far as parking.
So in terms of the owner of the big building, they also own your little building?
Yes.
So a conversation at some point, if you realize maybe that you need to store the little trailer somewhere, or that you need some additional staff parking or something, would be relatively easy to have because he's your building owner.
Yes,
too?
exactly.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you. Will the food truck be stored on site here? Is there a point at which sort of like the little truck gets packed away for the season and it gets stored here, or does it keep going while you're operating here?
So during the non-frozen months, there will be space to store the trailer so that we can get supplies and go about our way. Currently, there's other spaces in the Woodbridge district that are available for me to store the trailer. In the past, I've just stored it in my driveway under, a covered thing. So, or I could store it at my parents' house if need be. I've got options.
Okay, got it. Just want to make sure we weren't going to dedicate one parking space to the trailer for 3 months.
I don't believe so.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from you?
Through the chair, I actually have just a clarification from staff. You mentioned 2019 for the sidewalk project, but that you're applying for grant funds for that. And my question is, will that project go forward whether or not you or the city receives the grant funding?
Yes. I think this project will qualify for multiple grants, so I'm hopeful that if we don't get one, then we will get the other. But it's already been a council priority to get a sidewalk there, no matter what. So there's actually a pretty active member of the Parks and Recreation Commission who it's pretty key to her actually getting around the district, and so it's been a big priority for council. So I think we're committed to doing it regardless of a grant or not.
Would that commitment be for 2019 regardless of the grant?
Yes.
Okay.
Should we put something in site plan conditions that says that if for some reason that doesn't move forward, the site will be upgraded the way that we just talked about the last one?
By the applicant or building owner?
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
I think if for some reason it doesn't move forward, at least we'll be able to bring the small frontage and perhaps even by then the bigger frontage into
Sure.
compliance for the train tracks.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And if it does happen, great.
And I will say too that sidewalk, it's kind of tough to show without the map, but you'd be required to cross north to get across the railroad tracks. The way that there are some utility lines, and I think the way that Leonard Brothers building exists, it's very tight. So no matter what, we will be sending pedestrians north to go west. But just a point of clarification.
Through the chair, just to clarify that, because this project would ostensibly be moving forward prior to 2019, and we're not sure exactly how that timing is going to work out, would we still want to add that as a condition?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
I would say yes. I mean, this is a huge site. It's one owner. If for some reason the city wasn't able to do their full sidewalk plan in 2019, I would want this site to come more into compliance. So whether we want to put something in this site plan or wait until we see a bigger one, they may not be making substantial enough changes to the exterior of that building for it to even come for a site plan. I don't know if they're just using the internal. So
And I was just wanting to clarify.
I'd like to at least document the intent, particularly if we've got like 6 bike parking spaces and all these other great amenities that they're adding for mobility options. Your feet are also a great mobility option.
Yep.
Yeah, just in a changing neighborhood. That's all. Yeah, sidewalks was one of my questions too.
So, through the chair, I was looking at that. It's that same road apron sidewalk kind of street frontage kind of jumble up there. I was wondering if, regardless of, the sidewalk discussion, whether there's some sort of other opportunity for kind of completing that. I know, I guess it's all part of that same discussion, but
Right.
not just sidewalk, but
Streetscape.
streetscape,
Is that-
vegetation island, some sort of clarification for that access point there, since people are going to be, they won't be walking from the west necessarily, but from the east they will, crossing that same point of entry and exit. So.
And
Yeah.
there's some landscaping proposed too.
Agreed. Yeah. From the city's perspective, that the grant would include some streetscaping elements, and I think all the increased activity over here has helped make this area a priority for council. So, plans haven't been finalized yet, but absolutely streetscaping, potentially a buffered bike lane instead of just a conventional lane there, and then sidewalk, obviously. And we've been really talking about our tree canopy study and the recommendations coming out of that. And so this is one of the areas that certainly is lacking. I think the southeast corner of the city, and then this area really are the areas that need more trees. So that would be certainly part of the city's plan.
I've got a quick question. Sorry, just on that, sticking with that frontage. Is this now becoming a two-way? Are we entering and exiting both off of Woodward Heights? Do we have room for that? I don't know that you can actually circulate through the site and stay within the. I know you can circulate through the site because I've done it, but it's not. You don't stay on that site. You get into what's now the distillery's property behind Precision Spindle. So, is that entrance and exit both off of Woodward Heights? It looks like it's about a 23-foot lane there, ish. I know it's a little angled, but
Yes, our intention was for that to be both directional. I looked at the ordinance. I think it was 24 feet is the required width for a multi-directional. There is, and Kelly might be able to speak to this, the overall site plan would be adding a lot more parking. So our intention was until that happens, entering and exiting from this lot or this drive, but there might be the potential down the road that it becomes a one-way once the whole site becomes developed and there's a drive and more parking. But
you're basically 24, at least up front, in your compact car spaces.
Yeah, through the chair, I was actually noticing that that's on the other side of the property line, kind of that access
What am I missing?
through there. I guess so that's an adjacent property owner then. It's not any sort of city right of way. It's actually access to parking back behind.
Oh, the existing drive. I didn't even catch the dotted line.
So I guess it's really dependent on that adjacent property maintaining that as an access drive.
Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's adjacent building is the same owner as well. That the building where Urban Rest is the same owner.
Okay.
What about where Precision Spindle is? No.
No.
And that's what's closest to this.
But they are built right up to the lot line. I mean,
So who owns that maneuvering drive?
Who's that? Who's built to the lot line?
I mean, I see that your parking spaces don't extend over your parking line, but who owns the maneuvering drive?
so this is not right away. Okay.
Do you know, Justin?
Here's the Precision Spindles.
Precision Spindle.
Yes.
Yeah. So some type of access is going to need to be negotiated with Precision Spindle then.
So that's another condition.
Yeah, driveway
Yeah.
access. Anything else, Brent? Keep going.
An easement.
No, that's just the point of.
Okay. You got
That's the
better eyes
confusing
than me.
part there on that parcel with the access, and it kind of ties in once again to the streetscape, whether it's a bump out, some protection. There's a parking spot right on the edge there that's essentially in the road apron as it's presented. So I know we're doing a lot of ifs about what the streetscaping will be. I would feel more comfortable with that being actually a part of the site plan.
With the sorry, the parking space or the streetscaping discussion?
Between the parking space and Woodward Heights,
Yep.
the roadway,
That access drive.
that access drive and any landscaping or bump outs that would be a buffer between the parking spot and the roadway.
I think you might be the motion maker on this one. Because I get what you're saying, but I'm not sure how to articulate the second part of that. Because I see how it cuts the parking space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through the
Yes,
chair,
please.
along those
Sorry.
lines, and
I'm
maybe
so
a
absorbed in this
question
now.
for future consideration in our commercial and office district, in our MXD, we don't allow parking forward of the building line, and I don't believe in M1 that that's a condition yet, so maybe we want to think about that, but we're trying to get away from having cars parked in front of the building because of the conflict with pedestrians and the look as well. So though it's not in the books here, it might be something we want to consider ahead of time. And if there were a way to move that, if it could be designed so that any spots forward of the building could be shifted back.
Looks like, I mean, because those front spaces are compact, could potentially just move it all south.
Landscape buffer.
Looks like there's room
Yeah.
closer to the dumpster.
Shall we
Other
add that?
questions? Go for it. Other questions to the applicant or staff? Lord, I don't know how I didn't see the property line. That's embarrassing. I was just going to make sure that I asked the applicant if she knew. So there's another food-oriented business that's moving into this neighborhood as well, and just wanted to make sure that you knew that closer to Hilton, the owners of Anita's Kitchen are putting in a catering kitchen.
I had heard that.
And at this point, I don't think they have any plan to do carryout, as it's been approved now, but just so that you know, you've got another food neighbor sort of in the
Okay.
district, which is probably a good
Are
thing.
you saying that for like
Just FYI.
competition or just so like?
No, just FYI.
Okay.
Like you might want to sell their pastries or something.
I like it.
Yeah. just-
Okay.
we've got a little food hub that's developed south of 9 Mile, down where Garden Fresh Salsa used to be headquartered, down where B Nectar and people are, and it feels like there may be another little food manufacturing hub that's starting up here too. So
I think that's pretty exciting.
yeah, just FYI.
Okay.
Not sure if this is to the applicant or the city, but the chair is just looking at the 4 trees as discussed of being planted. They're kind of in the island of that little non-drive-through driveway. Is that intended to be maintained as a little pull-through perpetuity, or kind of how those trees might be related to any future discussions about the property there? This is just to the west.
I think that drive would probably be more useful to the larger building. That's part of the reason why we didn't really, at one point we had talked about making that drive a little wider and adding some kind of parallel 15-minute parking spots there, but further discussion we decided that that drive is likely more useful for the larger building or the complex in as a whole. So I think the larger site plan for the entire complex will probably address that more, but we thought it was a good spot for the trees that we'd be required to add for this project.
I guess through the chair, it's, I'm looking at a tree that lasts 10, 20, 40 plus years. Want to make sure it's in an appropriate location. So
Do you think that this
I don't
is
know
one
what to
where
say
we
about
might
that.
recommend the tree fund instead of trying to plunk something in the wrong spot?
tree fund, there's, we have the streetscaping, discussion. It's a little bit tricky because there's a lot of unknowns for the applicant.
So, through the chair, so is the site actually, and this may be very basic, this little square that's in the corner of the whole site, And has that truly been sectioned out as a site through the conveyance of property in a lease or any manner? I mean, because I don't see that in here. And so at this point, I mean, it hasn't been conveyed based on what I'm seeing. So the site is truly the whole thing, and I'm not sure how that would work at this point, given we're dealing with IC, I think HG as an owner of this whole property. They're the ones that we're going to be writing these conditions to. And we're really only talking about this little square area in the right corner. So I'm a little confused about where we are, I guess, legally. I mean, because we could to say, since the owner in the application is ICHG, and if I'm saying that wrong, I apologize, but plant a bunch of trees over here on the other side of the property, because it is one site at this point. So,
Hi, my name is Kelly Woodley. I'm part of the ownership team. So it's CGFH Ice House LLC, but no problem. I think our idea with the landscape and the thought of bringing this first tenant in was just to get in front of you folks and to see, you know, what you think of the use, how it pertains to the rest of the site. The rest of the site hasn't been completed yet. So our thought as it pertains to the landscape would be, you know, I think that we would rather defer the landscape requirements to the overall project. So we'll certainly put them in. We don't want to go and commit to doing them in the wrong place, as you mentioned, but we have plenty of room to incorporate all of the landscaping needs. We just wanted to have them shown on the plan at this point.
I guess my only concern with that is if we don't have you come before us with any more site plan approval and we approve this and we've in some sort of way reserved requirements on the property, we'll never see it again. It would be my concern.
Tree fund.
So, yeah, I guess that would lend me towards the tree fund. So.
It could be, you know, some sort of understanding that it benefits, you know, that neighborhood, because it sounds like the city is doing a big investment there and you guys are too. So
Yeah, if
perhaps
we
that's
don't
the
come
best way
before
to
you
handle it.
soon, we're in a bigger problem. But yeah, we would be happy to do the tree fund or commit to doing them at a later date. We could do maybe even a time frame if that would be allowed. If we don't have them in by that time frame, then make the contribution to the tree fund. Whichever way you see fit, we're happy to accommodate.
What do you
I
prefer,
think the
Commissioner
time frame
Gray?
makes a lot of sense if it's part of that larger vision for the whole site.
Sure.
I don't know if you have your answer as far as ownership and
It's still,
site.
to me, a little bit hazy as to, we have a tenant here discussing a project, and I don't know where they're at with that and their rights to that property and what we can tell them to do at this point. So, but
their issue, I think. Yeah.
that is their issue. So I would just, you know, I mean, we're obviously looking to make this. I think it's a great idea for the spot, by the way. But those would be my concerns, making sure that we're not losing any options, and they're going to get done. So that's it.
So we've talked,
Chair.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yep.
What time frame would we be comfortable with? If we are going to give both options in
Well, I'm
the motion.
thinking sidewalk and tree fund are both related to this 2019 city
Yeah, I would agree.
project.
Okay.
So if maybe we tie sidewalk and tree fund to
Mhm.
to that, then if for some reason that doesn't happen or it's not completed, then the Fuller site comes into more substantial compliance. Does that so
Agreed. And just to follow up through the chair,
so
because
2020?
yeah, well, right, because the streetscape project could influence that particular area where the tree plantings are going to occur anyway. So,
Does that work for you too, Commissioner Gurring?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions of the applicant? Other questions of city staff? So I've got notes here about sidewalk and landscaping, both of which would then relate to some type of deadline. If this doesn't happen, this happens type thing. We've also talked about documenting that shared driveway access
through the
the
chair,
adjacent property owner.
one other would be the shift of the parking to behind the building.
So really shifting that frontmost space south.
Correct.
Not necessarily behind the building, but further back on the side.
Yes.
Okay. Were there any other conditions that were discussed that we've neglected to review? And does anyone want to make a motion? I nominated Commissioner Goering, but it doesn't have to be him.
All right, I'll make a motion.
No pressure.
I move in the matter of, is it 780 or 800? I'm sorry, would do 780. Okay, Woodward Heights, the Planning Commission approved the site plan based on the plans dated received December 13th with the findings and subject to the following conditions. I'm sorry, the conditions that we listed, I should have, yes.
We discussed
driveway access being resolved, sidewalk being added to the front. The tree fund in lieu of tree plantings or landscaping on there within the timeline of the 2019-2020 city plan. Shift the parking south past, as a minimum, past, aligned with the face of the building.
Commissioner Azar, before you get a second, are you comfortable with the sidewalk being on that same timeline as the landscaping?
Yes. Support.
All right, that was a motion from Commissioner Azar with a second from Commissioner Brazen. Is there discussion on the motion, or does the clerk have any questions on those extra conditions?
No.
Nope.
No questions.
Discussion on the motion. I will have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioners Kelly,
Yes.
Casio,
Yes.
Farr,
Yes.
Williamson,
Yes.
Brazen,
Yes.
Azar,
Yes.
Goering,
Yes.
and Baker.
Yes. Motion passes. Wonderful. Okay. 2 new things in the same neighborhood. Away we go. We will move now to, our discussion item. Our only discussion item of the evening is in relation to 531 Vester Street. This is the Search Optics property. It's a rezoning discussion item, and our city staff will bring it forward. Oh, and I probably should have said thank you and congratulations. I'm sorry, I went too fast. So thank you, you guys. This is going to be a lot of fun. Thank you. Search Optics. hit
Sure,
me.
great. Another project we're very excited about. So initially, Search Optics, obviously, their campus has been growing. They've been investing in Ferndale. They had some success with Voyager, the building they own there as well. They approached the city recently to talk about a co-working concept called Incubizo, which we've been trying to add more office in the city in general, but I think this area is a really good spot for it as well. And co-working has been something we've been just really trying to recruit people, businesses and property owners to do. A lot of people working out of their homes in Ferndale. We've seen successes like the She Hive and Honey for Moms and on Hilton.
Did they just expand? She Hive?
She Hive just moved, I believe.
Okay.
Yep. And so it seems to be something that's in demand, obviously, in other cities, but we've really been trying to get something going here as well. So initially, as a co-working space, the existing building has been office or warehouse over a number of years. The Board of Zoning Appeals, interestingly enough, in I think it was 1989, because the site is zoned R3, approved a variance to continue either of those uses going forward, which was great at the time when Search Optics came. They were only going to, or not only, but they were going to work on the inside of the building, make some sizable improvements there to make this co-working space. And since that time, they relooked at the building and saw out front, hey, there's a potential that we could make this an even more desirable facility by enclosing a portion of it, roughly about 600 square feet. Add some doors and more seating area, more common area, which has I think been included in a lot of other office type uses, not just co-working. So that is when it triggered the conversation of, well, since that is technically an addition, the building's not conforming. The BZA did not give a variance for an expansion. Let's talk about a potential rezoning. So the adjacent site to the east, the main Search Optics campus is in the master plan. Future land use is proposed for commercial office, so probably continuing C2, which is to the south. That's what Voyager and CVS and those other uses are zoned. So we said that it might make sense to potentially do a conditional rezoning because of being adjacent to our three districts. It's probably unlikely this existing building would be used for housing, but staff directed the applicant that probably we would not want future uses such as bar, restaurant, so close to residential there in this particular building. There's not existing. I mean, it's very close to the surrounding properties. So we've been discussing that. Wanted to bring this forward to you all before official public hearing and make sure that we're on the right track and see if there's any particular uses that you wouldn't be comfortable there in C2. It's kind of a unique. Co-working spaces are kind of unique in that there's space for potential speaking events. Aside from just the co-working, could be future potential cooking classes, something like that, if the kitchen was built on a certain way, which hasn't been part of the plan to this point, but just thinking about potential future uses. So applicants wanted to talk about that and potentially talk about just future of the overall Search Optics campus and give you an update on kind of the changes since they've seen you. It's probably been at least a couple of years. So
on that point, did I understand correctly a minute ago that they've got two office buildings that are currently R3? Should we be considering both of those?
Sorry. This building in particular is zoned R3. The building to the east is zoned M1.
Oh.
But the future land use calls for a commercial office. So we did talk about, should we be rezoning them both? This still would probably be conditional rezoning, but just wanted to talk through all that.
Yeah, I guess I'd wonder if it's appropriate to treat both of them similarly, if that's what if that's what's called for in the future land use map, and if it's they're both sort of integrated into that residential neighborhood. There's not a huge difference if I'm picturing the right buildings.
Yeah, I mean the eastern campus is, the larger campus is
further
and closer to the railroad tracks. So I don't know that we'd want to limit it quite as much, but
so you're more comfortable with the M staying there?
I'd be comfortable with conditional C2 for the Incubizo building, and then the rest of the campus C2, and then offers more options for potential uses there.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Looking at permitted uses in our schedule or our table of uses, anything that jumps out as something you'd want to add to a condition that we not have in the middle of residential? Sort of things in the entertainment section, for example, in terms of banquet halls. That's special land use anyway. Private clubs, things with liquor licenses.
Right.
Is that kind of what you were thinking when you said restaurants? Okay. So are you just looking for feedback from us tonight on the types of uses we might want to address in a condition? Or
Yes.
thoughts from the table on that or anything else related to the question? As I continue to look at my table of uses, because I didn't do it earlier. Drive-ins, drive-throughs are already a special land use. Sorry, never mind, I'm not going to say that. So standard restaurants and sidewalk cafes are permitted by right in the C2. So I guess we would want to think about that, as well as perhaps banquet halls and private clubs, which would also potentially have liquor licenses. Hi.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I just came over here.
I thought you were part
Justin
of
was
the
doing
crew.
a great job. But,
I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize
introduce
we had
myself.
Search
I'm
Optics here
Christian
tonight.
Fuller, one of the
Welcome.
partners over at Search Optics. So
welcome. I'm like digging into my table. You
and here I am.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to answer any questions. Obviously, what we're trying to do is create a campus-type environment. Voyager, was one of the first ones after Search Optics. Going back a few years, part of the lot used to be the impound lot for Ferndale.
Right.
That's now parking. So we have ample parking around the entire facility. It's kind of cool, like Voyager, Reader's Choice Restaurant of the Year.
Congratulations.
Big win for Ferndale, I think. And, we want to make Incubizzo the same level. Being in the technology side of things, we have a lot of young people, and you see the type of folks that are coming out of college or even self-teaching themselves. And, they're looking for things like, where can I go that I'm not sitting at home and there's a TV on? And so we've worked, we got Ferndale Chamber of Commerce, the county, a lot of people involved that want to come help educate the people that are at Incubizzo. And we want to make it a very open type place. And, the additional few feet on the front, we've talked about things like having the Mayor's Business Council there and, different community events there. So it's exciting for us, and I think it really kind of completes that area because right now, honestly, it's not the most beautiful piece of property you've ever seen, but we want to make it something that the city would be proud of.
What types of, are you comfortable with the conversation that Justin sort of started about, there may be a couple of uses that have either a high parking requirement or late hours or potentially, sort of loud noise that wouldn't be compatible with residential? Does that make sense to you guys too? Or do you have like a strong need for, loud outdoor patios or something? Okay.
Not there at all. I think, if anything, it would be daytime cafe or something, but that doesn't really fit in with what we're trying to do there anyway. But no, evening nightclub, not in the plans.
Okay, because I think that's sort of the crux of the conversation is, are there a couple of things that are currently permitted in that C2 district that we would say on this site you could do this whole raft of things, but like not these three?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd be good with that.
Excellent. Questions for the applicant or the city? The applicant, who I didn't realize was here. I'm so sorry. I think it makes
through the chair
just fine sense, and you might want to do more than one parcel at once, frankly.
Yeah, through the chair is. It looked like this kind of came up because of that addition coming off the south of the building.
Exactly.
So I was wondering if it was looked at the frontage. I guess I should say the front setback. How if you rezone, what difference that's going to be, and what that might trigger from the city's kind of restriction as far as I believe both office space and C2 general commercial require to match buildings within the block about 500 feet or 600 feet. And if this would be within that front setback.
It depends on what buildings you're looking at. If you look at, the house, the old Craftsman that's, this way, that's one thing. But if you look at 1938, which is where Search Optics is,
right.
The setback's about this far off the road.
Yeah.
Which has been an issue, and we've worked with the city in recurbing and doing some things there to improve that. But with this, we'd look at having surrounding sidewalks and easy access to all the parking.
Right. So wouldn't want to.
No,
the whole point of it was because of this,
no,
and then actually changing that zoning may restrict that building front setback. So, just I guess make sure that's looked at for part of the discussion.
Any other questions or comments? I guess my only comment would be if there's more than one thing that we should address in that corner, would we want to do it now, or would you prefer to wait and do a broader update
I think
with the future land use map?
I think conditional only for this site, but we could bring back in the same meeting rezoning to C2 for the rest of the site. I think.
I'm just thinking if you're noticing the neighborhood,
and it's all at once and done.
Why not notice the neighborhood all at once? It's the same company, even though it's different buildings.
Right.
So if the neighbors had questions, it would be a thorough conversation.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that does. Okay. Yeah, we would probably like can.
Yeah, making sure that it doesn't accidentally restrict any of that.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yes, very good point. You feel bad you were here till the end and we were like 5
I like
minutes.
it.
It was like it makes a lot of sense. I don't know what else to say. I think
Sorry,
you're gonna.
makes it
I think you're
easy.
gonna be full. How many
Board.
people can you
I
accommodate?
think
I think you're gonna be like instantly
87?
full.
Is that the number?
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
I think it fits with what we're wanting to see. So,
Right.
yeah, thank you.
Us too.
I like it. Property owner on Breckenridge there, and I think
Okay.
how you guys, what you've done with the end of the street there and buffering the tracks and the whole area, you guys do a great job. So.
Good. Thank you. And hopefully more to come after this.
Excellent. Great. Well, Justin, unless you need any further direction or questions from us,
No, makes sense.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for coming out in the snow tonight, everyone.
Yeah. Not too bad.
Civic duties.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. All right, looking back. So administrative items, want to make sure that we do not forget two things that came up earlier this evening. The first has to do with how the treatment of retail floor space as sort of the subsidiary to the primary use in a manufacturing building is treated. And currently our ordinance says that there's a 20% minimum floor area. And I missed the meeting where this was last discussed. I think Josh must have been chairing that one. But when I read through it, I went, why would we even state it? That makes no sense. Why would I state a minimum? And thinking back to some of the first conversations about retail uses beginning to move into the M1, but still wanting to make sure that manufacturing was the primary in these districts, which was also a discussion during the master land use plan, even now the second time around, because this was like 10 years ago we've had these last conversations. And then specifically with medical marijuana as well, I know that we talked about a 20% maximum in terms of retail as a subsidiary use to a primary manufacturing or refining or something use. I'm like dead certain about that one, unless I'm insane, Krista and Deb. So
I think you're correct.
and so I just wanted to talk about it. I don't know if it's a typographical issue. Obviously, the things that have come before us are in compliance with it as it's written. Is there a reason for us to specify a minimum? And do we still think that a 20% maximum is a reasonable thing to specify in these districts? I would
I
be really
personally-
interested in hearing from the commission because we all talked about it tonight.
I personally think a maximum of 20% makes a lot of sense. I don't know that we need a minimum.
What was the conversation at the last meeting within this past year? Was it about a maximum?
Yeah.
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 Yes.
Testing me. no.
No,
But yeah,
no,
we
verbatim,
spoke in
right
that. Yeah. We were kind of trying to understand why it was written the way it was, and we talked at length about it. But a maximum was obviously something that we all felt would be the way to go, and what percentage. The one thing when I think about it is we want to set strict rules so people can find them, but if there's some sort of leeway there, if a more than 20% would ever become something that if you're producing, my only thoughts would be if you're producing something that takes very little space to produce and you have a 1,000-foot area and you only need, this 200 feet of this to
Well, then
produce
maybe you
it.
should be in an MXD, not an M1.
But if you're a small shop and you want to be in the new M1 or mixed-use area over there, then I don't know. I think a maximum is great. Way to approach it was what we all came away with, I think. So 20% sounds good to me.
Through the chair, I think maximum is the way to go, and I do agree that is what we discussed. But I may be wrong, but I thought we discussed looking at building as a test case to see if 20% made sense with some of the buildings in that district, or if some other percentage made sense based on what the building stock is in that district right now.
And
We
what
did.
the
We did talk
parking
about.
availability. I mean, were those the types of things we were thinking of?
Yeah, there's a lot, like we were talking about how if it was a
Sidewalks,
minimum, then
Yeah.
you could be having a closet amount, like you said. I think
Right.
Ian was one of the comments you made, you could be just in the closet, but if you have a really large building, you
closet
could have
with
even 20% could be some gigantic amount of
Mm-hmm.
space that
Sure.
maybe you don't
Yeah.
want to deal with, and maybe having a cap on it, on the maximum that is in addition to the 20%, but not exceeding. So I think we need to.
For the really sizable
Yeah,
properties?
if you've got
Yeah.
a great size, and maybe if it's a 2-story and you're talking about, you're getting into expansion and some formidable spaces that you might not want it to even be 20%.
I would think we would probably want to consider some language that says that for each case, you want to take in the specific characteristics of the building. Like, while I like 20% as a general rule of thumb, you may have a building where, in order for you to design an appropriate space in there, maybe you're at 22%. And if you try to shave off that 2%, it's going to completely mess up the design. Situations like that, I don't think any of us would want to hold someone hard and fast to the rule and say, nope, it's over 20%, so we're not going to approve it. Maybe that's what we should think about is can we I was thinking putting 20% in as a guideline, but even that I think is that leaves itself open for too much abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'd be more in favor of saying this is what we want a maximum to be, but the commission can take into consideration unique characteristics of a building or unique needs of a design, almost like a variance to adjust that.
I was just going to ask, are we pulling that in that special land use territory now rather than as permitted by right? And I don't know if
maybe
we
so.
wanna, I don't know if we want to do that.
The other word,
I don't want to make it harder.
Well,
Let's think of some of our considerations because we were thinking about what different types of uses with production would go in there. There's some juice bars and stuff, or some of the things that are going on now. But if you were a clother, and you're making clothing, but you want some sort of retail, do you want all of a sudden? I'm trying to remember what we were talking about, but some of these big box stores could come in, or couldn't Applebee's come in and say, what are we producing here? Well, we're making our own bread and bag, and you know. So I don't know. I think the use. There's a lot of things we discussed in that meeting. I wish I could.
we did.
remember better.
We did. Yeah, I was going through the minutes, and we were all over the place, but it's because it's an area in transition, and it's important, obviously, as the master plan stated. I kind of like what Commissioner Williamson was saying, and including some characteristics of the building and maybe the district. And, if we decide that we want to do pockets of form-based code throughout the city, there'll be many more. The type of building will be more important, but you'll also we'll have some language around use as well, but it would be more of the intent statements and prescriptive nature that we've kind of been talking about for the downtown, but more industrial in nature. Another option could be as well is that when we look at this district from a parking perspective and access and pedestrian circulation and all those things, it might make sense to make maybe the outer edge of the district a sort of a flex district that might allow for some of the flexibility that you're talking about, because even some of the buildings adjacent to Weiss Distilling would probably not be good candidates for this production type use. They could never achieve the parking requirements nor be within 500 feet of a sizable lot. So there might be portions of the district where you might have a 20 to 50% or something like that. I'm not sure. And one thing that I was talking with
You're
Chair...
thinking like if you front one of the more major thoroughfares.
Exactly.
Treat it a little differently.
Right.
In remembering that meeting, I think the real scare I had was, is this wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, because when we look at the uses that are coming in, they're really entertainment district type uses. We aren't getting production uses to make leather belts, and they want to have a leather belt selling front. We're getting, as we saw tonight, we're getting distilleries that want to have bars. We're getting coffee shops that, we're getting entertainment type uses. And that's what, I think we all identified in the master land use and some of the other meetings we had, what the whole city's kind of becoming, which is scary. And I think in that meeting I mentioned a friend has an HVAC company, and he couldn't find any space in Ferndale for his business. He lives in Ferndale. He wanted it because the cost is obviously one, but these are being highly sought after for these types of entertainment. They can't get into downtown. We still want to be in Ferndale. How do we do it? And that's why I think I was highly critical of Farm Field Table, which was the first one, I think, when we discussed.
Well, it was just discussion at that point, because I think I brought forth the ordinance amendment that included all the things from the master plan, and I think we all kind of said, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to evaluate this more than going with just the recommendations of the master plan. They were an example brought up for sure.
Yeah, because that's the one I keep falling back to that kind of aligns with this, is they wanted to change the language of the statute to say that you could have a restaurant, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so in the master plan, that was one of the recommendations of a special land use could be restaurant only associated with the production use. So it would have to be like Applebee's Bread Factory would have to, like, I guess, in that example. But you know, I mean, I think we've seen in other portions of the master plan where we've said, hey, let's hang on and study some things. So something I mentioned to Chair Baker that if the group is interested in is, I think the whole district kind of needs more study in general. Yeah. And it might be beneficial to actually just go and visit a lot of these facilities and see where potential parking could be, see the streetscape improvements that we're talking about as a city. Maybe talk to some of the building owners and say, who are the people that are coming to you to lease space? I mean, are you getting 10 sword makers and one HVAC company, or what is, you know, what is the reality of the situation?
Clearly 10 sword makers.
Yes. We do have one sword maker in the district, but yes.
Sword/mead maker.
Yes, right. Yes. All the Renaissance Festival things.
And I did, when Justin brought that idea up, which I do like, I just want to make sure that we don't inadvertently show any favoritism toward, like, here's all the new stuff we want to accommodate, as opposed to, like, here's, like, Robert's Machinery, which is, you know, 2 doors down from where we just put a distillery, and now what's that going to do to Kim Roberts and, like, his business that's been there for 40 years. So I think a balanced conversation about the city's vision for infrastructure improvements in that neighborhood and what can be accommodated and what keeps the mix, which I think we all want to keep the mix, could be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I almost, when I was talking about the flex like district on the outer edge, I was thinking of it more of just because, you know, obviously we have Hilton there that we do want to thrive and grow as mixed use, where a lot of these uses, there'd be no question about, you know, what's production versus retail. We want both of those things. So I guess when I look at the map, I think of like Hilton being a buffer on the outer edge, and then possibly Woodard Heights being a flex area that you could choose to, you know, have more leeway for these types of things and see how it goes as a test. But
I mean, frankly, I was surprised when Joe didn't want to do carry out at his Anita's Catering Kitchen. I was like, I don't understand. You have more than enough parking. Why would... And then he had the bigger idea and stuff, but for the site. But
it's just so convenient at the existing location to do carry out.
If you live next door.
I think one of the other points that I made in that meeting when we wanted to change the language was, you know, we're creating the interaction of somewhat, you know, or not somewhat, but very different businesses like a wire company or a, you know, and then suddenly you've got people walking to and from a distillery or walking to and from a restaurant for lunch, and people are trying to move large semi-trucks, and that's why the safety was, I was trying to recall everything that we talked about, but you're mashing together some uses that we just, it's fine, you know, obviously to do that. We just got to be cognizant of the interaction, and we don't want to lose that industry because we still want to have live work in Ferndale, you know, and
I still want an industrial tax base in Ferndale.
Exactly. If we lose that, that's and we go all to this entertainment district, and I mean, we're hearing, you know, plans about this area right there next to the tracks being an event area now, and is that, you know, that's not a industrial use, and it's not. So we will see that, I think, industrial area go away. It's naturally happening, I think, now, and that's one thing I think we should try to protect to a certain degree. So
this is reminding me of the conversation we had about the potential for like loft-style apartments in that district, where I think the consensus of the commission generally was that's not really something that we want to be promoting. Maybe in a special, unique circumstance we could allow it, but we don't really want to promote that. And I feel the same way about this issue, really. For some specific types of uses, I mean, I don't know. I do think it's a good idea to take a look at the buildings. I do think it's a good idea to consider what the circulation actually is through the district, because I agree that there are going to be a lot of buildings in here that aren't really going to be a candidate for this at all. And maybe it does bear a closer look at the entire district to carve out a couple of small pieces, maybe to say, here's a couple small pieces where this kind of thing might be okay, but if you don't have the characteristics of this smaller subgroup of buildings, you're just not a candidate for it.
During the master plan, I remember that there was a group of property owners, business owners in this area that were very active, and they were talking about names and everything of the area, and I'm wondering if that group of folks had a mix of your more traditional kind of industrial and these newer businesses, and if so, then maybe that's a good group to tap for a tour.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've been interested in kind of doing that. It's been a mixture of everyone from Ferndale Electric to the newer folks and the Candlewick Shops production area.
I was just going to say, if I'm going to go to a micro distillery, I want to go to Coventry Creation.
Yeah.
Right?
It was a very cool group to get together, and they were bouncing ideas off each other. And I think they've came together even more since that time. I mean, some of them had said, when we were talking about would you ever live in your district, a lot of them were like, I would never live here. And other ones were like, yeah, it'd be great. I could walk downstairs and work on things for a little at night. And then, some were saying, we wish we had more like coffee shops and stuff like that are closer, a little small hardware store, stuff like that, close that they could walk to in the district instead of having to drive downtown or drive, to Livernois or whatever for lunch. So it was... I think that group would be happy to get together again and be part of the tour. So
yeah, I think it's interesting also how the different uses. We know that there's limited ability to do on-street parking. We know that there's going to be some challenges in there, but by keeping a mix of uses, you balance some of your infrastructure demands.
Right.
So as we've seen downtown, when you flip over to this very concentrated peak hour sort of time, you now have like total imbalance in your infrastructure. Like my parking lot is empty for 8 hours a day, and then no one can get a spot for 4 hours.
Right.
To flip. I don't want to recreate something that we've learned doesn't work somewhere else inadvertently. Interesting. But we also aren't going to likely get back another Midwest Wire products.
Right. And frankly, I think some of those facilities would look in the M2 district, but.
So, is there a sense from the commission that we want a change? I would say a correction that I just hadn't noticed until now, or a change sooner rather than later regarding the floor area maximum, or do we want do we want to go through this larger process first? One step, 2 steps?
I think the latter, if we're going to be comprehensive.
So rather than just changing that word, we'll continue with the larger discussion.
Okay.
Because perhaps it leads to... I like having things permitted by right. I think it makes it cleaner for you guys, makes it cleaner for applicants. But if we need to make sure that we're treating buildings and uses appropriately, maybe some of these change to special land uses so that there is sort of more flexibility.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Does that mean in the meantime, though, if that's not being updated, that somebody can be like, okay, I'm 90% retail because...
Yes, it does.
And so that's something we have to...
Yeah. No, I would want to... I'd want to make it maximum like tomorrow. But you guys seem to know. I'm only one vote.
So So through the chair, what do we think that effort would be? Is it a 6-month effort, a 3-month effort?
I hope not 6 months. Yeah.
Good numbers.
Right. Right.
Do it tomorrow.
It's probably 3 to 4 realistically, I guess. But I mean, I could probably set up a tour. I imagine we'd have to split up the tour for quorum purposes, I think. But I could set up the tour for early January, and we could kind of go from there. And maybe in the background, we can work on some options.
If we have some interim alternatives while we do this,
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's easy to just switch word, but
I know.
maybe that's kind of.
It still would be, I guess, probably first council meeting in February if I came back to the next meeting with a maximum language, but just for public hearing notice purposes.
And if we're changing it that the maximum, then we'd still get the issue of a very large building or parcel could have
Right.
an extremely large square footage, even
Yep.
though it's still under that threshold. So if we're already going to be changing that language, I don't know, it still gets into that tricky, do the whole thing or not, but I guess it's like a stopgap. I don't know. And we haven't discussed it, but really quick. I mean, I don't know if there's an option for a sliding scale of a different percentage based on different square foot kind of footprints of buildings, so that you're not getting a 20% of a 10,000 square foot or whatever you want to say it is.
100,000.
100,000 square foot.
Buildings, yeah.
But you can allow maybe closer to 50% of a 1,000 square foot. Something, I don't know if that's an option or not, but anyway.
Yeah.
Good idea. I think it's worth considering.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't get to the overall district of the intent with the M1, so.
Or to an immediate and specific language change.
Right.
So I'm hearing there's not a lot of support for an immediate and specific language change.
Well,
I think there should be some. I mean, at first I don't like stopgaps generally, but I mean, it seems like there's this common feeling like, wow, there could be this problem that arises. Is it really going to arise instead of 3 months? Maybe not, but if it's easy to make that change, let's make it, and then let's make the more comprehensive change following it. I mean, we'd be making 2 changes, but
Otherwise, we're rushing to make a more comprehensive change. And
right,
not taking
let's
the
give us
time.
some time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Had I been here for that meeting a couple months ago, I would have said then, I think this is a typographical error. I think minimum is an error.
I do too.
And it was meant to be maximum. I really remember those conversations very clearly. And then the subsequent conversations when applied to medical marijuana grow and sales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think we all felt that same way.
Okay.
I thought we asked for some language change then, but I don't know. All right.
See what the city staff is conferring.
I mean, yeah, we're conferring. Maybe go for it.
I was just kind of bending Justin's ear in the sense that I think we could really work with a sliding scale. I think, it just as we've kind of looked at the different development zones throughout the city, there are plans coming to us all the time. I kind of joked with the building official this week that I'm glad it's dumping snow because maybe things will stop for a minute. But this is the plan time, and so as this district continues to come to life, we're going to keep getting more and more of these decision points. So if we had that direction and sort of that sandbox of staff, I didn't want to automatically commit them to this, but I was thinking that perhaps we could come to the next planning commission with some proposed language. The sliding scale idea, bridge is a good medium that you can work with in the interim while you figure out the larger piece. It lets us work with the individual properties.
I'm more comfortable with that than just switching a word.
I just want action sooner rather than later. So if that's if we're more comfortable with something more flexible than just changing a word.
Okay. I would be in favor of that.
All right, sounds
Okay.
good. We'll come up with some sort of scale.
Did we also want to talk about shared parking timing?
I was just looking during the conversation. Axel Brewing was 3 years.
Was it 3? Okay.
Yes, which seems pretty reasonable.
I I think Ferndale House was 5.
I think and being that that was a larger project and downtown, I think 5 makes more sense there, but I'd be open to suggestions.
I have a question for clarification. That's just how long a specific agreement has to be in place?
Right.
Is there still that required amount of parking in perpetuity? They always have to have a certain number of spaces, whether it's that agreement or some other agreement?
I don't think we close them down if that shared parking agreement lapses. Is that?
I guess we're saying you have a lot. You need 10 parking spaces. You put 5 there, and you get an agreement for 5 elsewhere. After 3 years, you no longer have to have those other 5 spots. Whereas somebody who's actually in compliance within their own site has to maintain those 10 spots. They can't get rid of 5 of them in 3 years. It feels like I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
what about a grace period in which they have, if that lapses and they lose that agreement, they have a certain period of time to get back into compliance, get a new agreement, figure out a solution to address that parking. I also don't like the idea that they can just, after 3 years, then poof. What if someone has the shared parking agreement and that's 90% of their spaces?
Right.
Axel.
Yeah, along those lines, the shared parking agreements that we're seeing, are they initiated by the property owners, or do we have a standard template that we have language in that we are comfortable with that maybe could reflect that they would have to adhere to?
We have a standard template, and I'd have to see what kind of carve-outs are there, provisions like that going forward. But
these are contracts that we're not parties to, obviously.
Right.
And so if I'm Ferndale Foods and I say to Ferndale House, well, you know what, we did have that agreement. There's this liquidated damages clause. I'm going to pay you $5,000. You don't have those spots anymore. How do we go back to Ferndale House and say you have to get more spots now? We can't really, because it's already been approved.
Yeah, it's tough.
Based
tough
on
to
that,
enforce.
and based without any language that calls them back if they lose it, and then how do we monitor that? And that's why parking agreements have been kind of giving me trouble lately. I don't know if it's a real remedy to our parking. So in 5 years, when all these parking agreements expire, that we put
or
in,
when Wolf River, but like Otis Supply is a great example.
right?
It didn't expire. They just sold the property out from them.
Then we're looking for another parking structure.
Yeah, does that become the city's problem?
Right.
Great.
I don't want to necessarily open a can of worms.
There might not be an answer here. I wanted to make sure we didn't lose the thread of this one.
Something that we're considering, as we prepared a bond for a 400-space parking deck is obviously we don't let developers count the spaces in the public system like Wolf River. Yeah, it's a community benefit that they were putting those 15 spaces, but they don't get to count that in their ratio.
Which we had to remind them every time.
Correct. Yeah. They, if we let them count it, but sort of talking out of the other side of my mouth on that idea is, at a certain point, the public parking does have to play some kind of role in that overall ratio, because one of the things that, just from a recruitment and a retention standpoint, if you require on-site parking for every development, you can really only build what you can park, and so that'll limit our options in terms of the urban form that we can curate. The requirements that we put on will have ripple effects into what gets produced. So how that gets shaken out, again, I apologize for opening a can of worms on it, but that's something that we're thinking about in terms of we're throwing, when you factor in the net spaces, the 385 spaces into the system, what does that do for demand?
That's not a can of worms you're opening. I think that's one that we struggle with at most every meeting, and that we're certainly dealing with as we talk about height and density in downtown. So, yeah, that's not a... Yeah.
It's already open.
Yeah, it's open.
The only thing I
Do
see...
we want to plan for cars or not?
Right.
We'd all rather not, but...
We try to put the burden on the property owner, and then, we're allowing the property owner to get this agreement and pass it. I think we almost have to kind of come to an understanding of, are we going to force on-site parking? We can make people get creative.
Yeah, we're walking the line right now.
Because in 3 to 5 years, if the growth that's projected and has been applied for realizes, I think I think about the distillery tonight. The requirement is 10 spaces. but it's got how many bar stools?
19.
You know, I mean,
Right.
I look at Valentine Vodka, they got,
Yep.
you know, I mean, that place just jams people
Talk about
in.
non-conforming parking. Yep.
So, I mean, I think the idea is great. I'm not trying to knock the idea, but when thinking about parking, I'm thinking, God, they're going to be parking everywhere down there. You know, then there's no public parking lot anywhere near that site.
Luckily for them, that big lot though, they have 10 spaces in there. That lot's going to be parked up with people going in there. How is the property owner going to keep people from parking in any other spaces aside from those 10?
Right.
Well, and what
There's a
happens
remedy to that.
afterwards?
I don't see that happening, like in the evenings.
Maybe
but,
not.
But that's only one property.
Right.
You know, the issue is going to recur.
Yeah.
But
or,
I think that does.
or they're going to lose their access to it because that property owner is going to change his tenant mix.
Right.
Right.
He's open his own.
I think these
Right.
individual cases, I think the bigger question is exactly what you mentioned. Like, are we going to plan for cars, or are we not?
Yeah.
And you know, it's
I'd
hard.
love to not.
Right. It's
Well,
it's
we
hard
planned
where
for
we're at
transit
right
10 years
now
ago, it didn't
because
come. Yeah.
because
We
of
want
the
density.
reality.
Yeah.
But going forward, you know, hopefully with diversifying transportation modes and all of that, and doing TOD, and I mean, are we hedging our bets on that, or are we not?
Yeah, we planned for transit the last time we updated the ordinance, and yeah, we're ahead of the entire region, and we have no parking. And
But at least we're doing a lot of non-motorized improvements, right?
I mean, that's,
indeed, yes.
I think your market's going to react to that eventually. Eventually, that's going to be factored into business decisions and how many customers can reach me if I have X parking and this is what's around me. You already sort of see it with Axle. They rely. Dan had told me they rely, I think, 20 to 40 customers a night are using rideshare just to get to their place.
It's
So
a
I mean,
transit.
it's not so
Just going to say that.
But that kind of stuff is factoring their decisions even tangentially already. So, you know, water takes a shape of its container, right? If we build a container that's not for cars, eventually the type of businesses that can thrive in that environment. Even with the deck, we're planning a shared street. We're not looking for pig and whiskey, you know, by a third name in that area. This is going to be more neighborhood Western Market wanted to do, a quick outdoor market. Like things will be aimed at the people who already live here, not necessarily just the folks who can drive in.
I would just like to add one other thing to this conversation, and that is perhaps we set some kind of limit on the percentage of parking we allow with a shared parking agreement. So, for example, the distillery tonight, 100% of the parking was a shared parking agreement, correct? So, if that was only 25% or something, would that end up making more sense for the city? And that way, at least, we're allowing for some people to get there via car in the future. So,
And then
And I
really
often
good
think about
compromise.
staff versus visitors. You know, it's a problem we know we've got downtown, in that in order to create and save spaces for visitors, staff were parking in neighborhoods.
So that, I mean, and in that example, we still have the payment in lieu tool that is. We always talk about it downtown, but it could be used other places. So that if
Interesting.
the shared part, if you know, we only waived that certain percentage, then payment in lieu would have to come in. I mean, that would be the option for them. Of course, council has the option to deny it, but
But if there's like a payment in lieu for separate districts throughout the city, that makes more sense to me than
because the parking was so
you know,
horrible. They're
a
like,
sunsetting
"We didn't centralize
shared
parking
use agreement.
areas."
Yeah.
Because those parking spaces go away, where the other one next, you have that opportunity for those denser districts still. So, and you make a lot more, you're using space a lot more wisely because you don't have all the separate access, all the different curb that are the aprons through the sidewalk. You can kind of get that benefit of the scale of it.
And you're allowing those businesses that maybe aren't going to need to rely on so much parking to still operate and make that choice actively.
Because I've been thinking about that just when we we're talking about the form-based code, but also just like mixed use down Livernois. Right now, as it is, every single one of those needs to have some drive that comes in that goes along the building with parking next to it. So every single one of those is kind of whole in that urban form. Whereas if you have those payment in lieu of parking, and the city is able to kind of bring those a little bit smarter together in a more constrained space, you get a lot more parking compared to the amount of total space used for parking.
What if we tie those things together, and if a shared parking agreement expires and they don't have it replaced within 6 months, they have to make the payment in lieu?
I like that.
Something creative like that. I mean, we'll have to look at all the different areas because it works downtown because you have a couple blocks width. In a mixed-use area that's one street, one parcel depth.
Yeah.
With residential there, we don't have parking zones there. We don't have some of those other considerations. We don't have that depth to be able to get like an alley behind somewhere where there isn't one. So
We don't have the property.
We don't have the large city-owned
right
parcels.
now, yeah.
But I
Well,
like
it kinda
that
do.
with a combination of perhaps a percentage that we're comfortable with actually granting for shared use, or shared parking.
Sure. And
Just
It's
exploring what that could look like.
It's a different way to look at it, and it's a longer-term view than just what works right now in the site plan review. I do still think that ways to encourage that balance of uses helps reduce the amount of paved parking needed. If you've got your staff parking for your manufacturing uses during the day, and you've got your district visitors parking in the evening.
Yep.
Yay, fun.
All right.
Okay, so did anyone bring a snow shovel?
I gotta go home and shovel.
yeah.
I'm afraid our cars are now like well buried.
I won't belabor you with any more administrative items other than there's a draft schedule. Take it home, look at it, see if that makes sense to you.
Yeah,
And
thank you for
then-
making that November update.
And then you'll be getting a new zoning map in the next week.
Just not
That was
to,
supposed to be a holiday present, but
not
to-
to
today
circle
happened.
back for it, but on the parking agreements, so are we going to get language, or I mean, is it going to be, what are we coming back to?
What's the direction?
Just so you know, I mean, it's because next meeting it's going to be like, well, do we put language together? Is it dicta? What is it I hear that we're operating under to require what I'm hearing as a percentage limit, I guess payment in lieu mandatory after termination of an agreement, and I thought there was a third thing there, and is that something that we'll just have to put into a condition every time?
And it sounds like there's a city attorney conversation about
Yes.
what you can and can't regulate within a site plan. Yeah.
Right.
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 So
Yeah, I heard the two things. I'm not sure what the third one is.
maybe
but
I just heard stuff,
but-
which is very possible at this
Maybe,
point.
maybe just a timeline
Might have
thing
been,
Yeah.
as far
if it
as
sunsets or not.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Two things.
Yeah, because right now we've sort of tied it to that specific site plan, not to the property owner.
Three things. Makes sense.
Can we tie that to a site plan, and is it enforceable? It's different than, replacing the dead trees, which code enforcement would deal with,
Yeah.
All right. Shall we adjourn? Any other items? Great. So I think that says 9 o'clock. Yes? And really, does anyone have a snow shovel? 'Cause